Okay, hi everyone. I hope you can hear me now. Can Yes, perfect. So let's start us off. I'm sorry that you will not be able to see me, but we did have some connection problems over here. So we are basically just to start off the session. This is the first event out of two webinars that we are going to do around community currencies today and tomorrow. Um, and as I said before, but I'm not sure everyone has heard me, I would like to invite everyone who is here already to basically quickly present yourself in the chat so that we know a little bit about who you are and where you're coming from. Yeah, so basically we have a chat window where you can introduce yourself. We have a Q&A window where you can ask questions to the speakers that we're going to answer in the second part of the session. And I'm going to start off telling you a little bit more about what this event is going to be about, what positive blockchain is, and so on and so forth. So let's start with that quickly. So basically what we've been doing before as Positive Blockchain together with Impact Hub in Berlin is a series of events around blockchain for social good. And what we're doing now is kind of a bit of a digital extension of that and a little bit of a different format. And what these events are all about are different use cases and various use cases of blockchain technology in the areas of social impact and basically use cases around positive blockchain. So this is linked to a global community that Positive Blockchain is, and also to a database that basically categorizes and has all of these different projects and initiatives included. You can look at that via positiveblockchain.io. And something that we have been also doing in the last year is basically we've been writing together with Script a report on community currencies, which is something where you can also find a little bit more background information, or if you want to read up a little bit more about the topic that we are talking about today, and all the projects that we are going to discuss today. And I'm really glad that all of you are here and waited for me to finally come on and be able to talk. And I hope that we will hear quite a lot from these amazing projects today that are working in the area of community currencies. So just a little bit about the event series. So today we are going to hear from Sophie Blagstad of Hiveonline. Hi, Sophie. We're going to hear from Anka Bogdana Rusu from Celo and Zelo. And we are going to hear from Will Rudick and Caroline Dama of Grassroots Economics. In the session tomorrow, we are going to have Sandra Uvan-Tegehart of Oxfam and of the Unblocked Cash project. We're going to have Karim Shabrak of CoinSense, and we're going to also have Markus Ewald of the Digi project, and that will be moderated by Maciej Bulanda. So don't forget to also join us tomorrow. But let's first start it off, and let's basically hear from the projects that are here with us today. I want to just quickly around what the topic is of this session. Also, the session tomorrow is the topic of community currencies and how they can help trade and community development in general, but also with a link to the current crisis related to COVID-19. And I hope that we will learn some things from the projects also with their perspectives on and with the perspective on how these systems and community currencies can help with that. So I will stop talking now, and I would like to give the floor to the projects to introduce themselves. And maybe starting off, because I don't know how to give priority to you, I would start off with the alphabetical order and would start with Anka and Celo and C-Labs. Anka, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon or morning or evening, depending on the time zone that you're in. And I'm going to be optimistic and assume that people from different time zones are joining us today. So thank you for your time. My name is Anka. I am a partner at C-Labs working on Celo. I've joined the team at Zelo, having worked with the World Bank and IFC on financial inclusion and digital finance in emerging markets for 8 years. And my work and my goal through my work right now is really to change the story of blockchain and financial inclusion from potential to reality. Mike, do you also wanted me to go straight into introducing Celo and C-Labs and what we do, or just a personal introduction? I am going to move forward then with talking briefly about C-Labs and Celo. Khalid, could you kindly share the slides that I've shared earlier on, if possible? If not, I can also go off script without the slides. Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much. Can you please confirm you're seeing the slides? Because oh, okay, they're there now. So briefly about Celo. Celo is an open platform that makes financial tools accessible to everyone with a mobile phone. And to quickly break that down, an open platform is that we are built on blockchain and we are decentralized. We are also EVM compatible, and so we're using smartphones and financial tools that we're thinking about, that we imagine both take advantage of current features of money, but with the possibility of smart contracts and programmable money, also new features, which I think are extremely important as we talk about digital currencies and community currencies. And mobile phone, in the sense that our entire technology stack is designed with the end user in mind. The Celo platform is inspired by extensive research that has been done in emerging markets and developing countries, from the Philippines to Kenya, Tanzania, Colombia, Argentina, among others. Celo is a mobile-first blockchain platform along a suite of financial tools that are accessible to anyone with a basic smartphone. As of last year, we've tested how the network works on a $16 second phone, Android phone that we picked up in Sierra Leone. And our vision is that on the platform, value can be transferred faster and cheaper than traditional bank wires using global accessible technology. And because cryptocurrencies are completely programmable, then a wide array of financial services can be created without costly intermediaries. If we go to the next slide, what I wanted to talk briefly about is what makes Celo different, which is its mobile-first approach. The project is thought out as a full stack. So starting with the blockchain, that again is open source, decentralized, and works with smart contracts, to the Celo SDK, which we think it's really important to for us to achieve our mission, which allows developers to build native mobile dApps The difference with the majority of the existing dApps right now is that they are mobile native. They're not web native. And so it's much easier. They're lighter and able to be charged on and utilized on phones. And as an example of a dApp that we have used and built is the Celo wallet that aims to enable fast, secure, stable digital payments to mobile numbers at really a fraction of today's costs. To go briefly through the technical innovations that I want to highlight that I think are particularly relevant to today's conversation, again, the Celo blockchain is mobile first in that it allows light client syncing on mobile devices. The blockchain also works with stable value currencies because we believe that a big part in the fact that cryptocurrencies that hold great promise for financial inclusion haven't been significantly impacting these population is the fact that one, they're too complex for the average person to easily and safely transact, and that the price volatility really makes them undesirable for merchants to accept as payments. And then last but not least is the decentralized phone PKI, which really what does, it takes a public key and hashes it to phone numbers so that the experience of somebody transacting on the Celo blockchain is as easy as mobile money or Venmo. You don't need to remember a high entropy and really long public key anymore. Now, our mission as a team is to build a financial system that creates conditions of prosperity for everyone. And this is a really lofty, ambitious goal. The only way that we can conceive that this is possible to achieve is that by building a thriving ecosystem and empowering entrepreneurs from around the world to take advantage of the technology that Zelo brings forward. That's why, if we can go on to the next slide, our big focus has been to work with partners in market to build the Alliance for Prosperity around the use cases that we think are most relevant in these markets to really take the blockchain from potential to how it can actually and meaningfully bring an impact in the market. We've listed here a few of the use cases that we're focusing on, and on the next slide, a wide range of Alliance members and partners that we work with in market, ranging from Positive Blockchain, and thank you for the invite again, to Mercy Corps, the Grameen Foundation, to partners such as Casha Labs in Kenya, who's building a remittance program in Zelo, and further, we're talking about 70 plus members working on various implementations and use cases. And I will stop here. I think I'm at my 5 minutes limit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And I think, and also for the audience already, if you have more specific questions, please already start sharing them in the Q&A section so we can all go into those questions later on with some more time and detail. Thank you so much for your introduction, Anka, and also for being here. Going to the next introduction, can I ask you, Will and Caroline, to give us some a quick introduction of Grassroots Economics and your work?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Good. Hey, everybody. Hey, Dama. Hey, Sophie. Hey, Anka. Sorry, my video is not working. Okay, I'll be real brief and then hand it over to Dama. So we started working on community currencies here in Kenya back in 2009, and we've done everything from testing Bitcoin-based systems to mostly paper systems. And then for the last 2 years, we moved on to an ERC20 blockchain called POA. And we eventually moved on to where we are now is called XDAI. And basically, I just maybe in a nutshell, what we've kind of learned over the last 10 years is is the importance of having real assets and backing behind currencies, and not just kind of expecting them to be a happy-go-lucky thing that anyone can make in the world. And we've learned that in a lot of different hard ways. And I'll hand it over to Dama, if she can.
Hello. Thank you, Michael. Hi, Anka. Hi, Sophie. Thank you for the invite. So, like William was saying, for us, it's been a learning process. But of course, when we started, there were questions. We were working with a lot of communities, and we are seeing that there's some needs that the traditional donor aid or the traditional market was not missing. So for us, always it was the question of how can we bring financial inclusion to the communities we work with, and what will that financial inclusion look like? How can we find a way that we find financial services that are enabling the communities to meet their basic needs, that are delivered in a responsible and sustainable way? And most important is that they encourage the bottom-up solutions and also really deal with the socioeconomic aspects of this. And we saw that the community inclusion currency was able to pick most part of it. And of course, through our journey was finding ways that we could make it better. And so adapting to changing times. And part of it also was making it more efficient. So going digital, leveraging on the blockchain. And it's been a good learning process. We've learned from the community. They've learned a bit from us, quite a lot. And I hope that as we go through this small journey today, we can be able to share those experiences and also learn something new. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dama. So to do the last introduction, Sophie Blackside of Hiveonline, can you also give us an introduction? And we're going to bring up your slides in a second as well.
Sure, thanks very much, everyone. So I come to the world of development from a slightly different angle. I spent most of my career in banking. So I come with a techie and sorry, I was going back to the beginning of this, a techie and a financial services background. But it became very obvious to me after a long career building international banks that the last thing the world needs is another bank. So we started with Hiveonline instead. And we're a real last mile solution like Will's, and we start with the customers. So I'll introduce you to one of our customers. So I know how tough it is building a business from scratch, but it's even harder for Farida. She lives in Niger, didn't go to school, can't read, and she's never had a bank account, but she started a business with 4 other women making peanut flour. And they need a peanut processing machine to grow the business, but nobody will lend her $200 without a credit history. Mohamedi runs a successful microfinance business in Niamey. He knows there are thousands of entrepreneurs like Farida out there building businesses, and they need growth capital, but they're invisible to him. So he's got the problem of trust, he's got the problem of access to these customers, and also the problem of transporting cash to the villages. Because he needs to send an armed guard with it. Niamey is in the middle of the Sahel region, where, as you probably know, there's a fair amount of conflict, and Niger has the distinction of being the least developed country in the world. So unlike Kenya, where most people have a mobile phone and most have used mobile money, it's a very different kettle of fish. But Farida is a member of her village savings group, which of course are all over Africa. And that's helped her establish her business, as well as providing some economic resilience. But it doesn't obviously give her credit history or a loan big enough for the peanut processing machine she needs. So what we do is we build the bridge between formal institutions like Mohamedi's and informal entrepreneurs like Farida with our distributed community finance solution. It digitizes trust. And although we're a blockchain platform, trust is our primary selling point. So Hiveonline's a toolbox of services for entrepreneurs that puts reputation in their hands. It doesn't matter who they are, customers, lenders and partners know they're reliable based on what they've done. Businesses build trust by delivering what they've agreed, based on relationships made through the trust we've helped them build. Trust is built on facts about what they do as they agree, deliver, and transact. And our analytics measure the commitments they make and meet. We build a digital reputation to show how reliable they are based on what they do, and that goes on the blockchain. And we have structured loans which incentivize sustainable behaviors. We also aggregate risk at a community level so communities can leverage their collective muscle. So that's both the behavioral element and also a risk aggregation element, which means that for lenders like Mohamedou, they have more confidence lending and they can lend larger amounts. But we still use the existing social structures. And we, as we say, we digitize trust, so we use existing social bonds, but we enable the communities to monetize those social bonds through the platform. Unlike many people, we're built on the Stellar blockchain, which obviously brings down the cost, like everyone else, and creates this distributed financial ecosystem. We're built on a stable coin again, based on lumens, which is pegged to the West African franc in this case, but obviously can be anyone. And we have a 3-token model. So customers buy share tokens, which is effectively their digital currency, their community currency. And then we have a debt token for loans. And the share token obviously grows in value as they use the pot for lending or for commercial activities, which most of them do. And we've also developed an offline mode, although we haven't deployed it yet, which will start to give us access to rural communities which are out of reach of traditional mobile money. Our first product is out in Niger with Care International. We're partnering with Care and also with Capital Finance, which is the microfinance institution that I was talking about. The reason we're in Niger, and everyone asks this, why in Niger, is because it's the place where Care first documented and started rolling out the Village Savings and Loans Association model, which is now rolled out to something like 15 million customers across the world. They have 800,000 customers in Niger, which makes them larger than the entire banking system. So they're a significant financial services provider. So they've sponsored our release in Niger and our partnership with Mohamedou. But we're also starting work on projects in Mozambique. So Anna here has a small farm, but she still doesn't have access to formal finance, just like most people. But she's managed to buy a fishing boat with a loan from her savings group. And we're now working with charities supporting both fishing and indeed cashew trees. So Anna has cashew trees and she has a fishing boat. But the challenge there is actually building better crop production, better crop care, and also more sustainable fishing. So we're working with the same sorts of structured lending products, incentives for communities, and this, again, the same 3-token structure, but with a slightly different bent, which is more towards sustainability, as well as obviously the financial inclusion and financial resilience for these ladies. It's now got especially important in times of COVID, because COVID is disrupting international supply chains, which are especially important for the cashew industry. So that now is becoming a much more urgent project, and we've just been talking to our client about how we can accelerate that. A little bit about us. As I said, I've spent most of my career building international banks, but I also do. We also do quite a lot of research. This book out, so if anyone's interested, you can read a bit more about our approach. And we also advise the UN and various international bodies, like everyone else here. We're part of the startup community, but we're also part of the international thought and leadership community and developing the knowledge in this sphere. So although we're very much on the ground in the last mile solution, we're ploughing back our thoughts and knowledge about the distributed economy into some of these global institutions, which I think is a really critical part of what all of us are doing. And it's great to see all the others here as well. So hi guys. So yeah, I'll shut up now. Just to say that we're also a team of immigrants. We've only got one person who lives in the country they were born in, so all of us know what it's like to be displaced and do something a bit weird. Great to be here.
Okay, Thank you so much all for your introduction. And the first question that I would like to ask to actually all of you is basically around pretty much the title of this session that we have put out. How can community currencies help trade and community development during the current crisis? And I think, Sophie, you've already touched upon a lot of these points. I think, Dama, you've also been going already a little bit into the issues that the communities are facing today. I would like to hear basically from each of you on their perspective of how what kind of changes you see in communities these days, and how community currencies can specifically be helpful during times of COVID-19. Maybe starting with you, Dama, this time.
Thank you, Mike. So I think someone said that people have been waiting for a world war, and they're saying that with COVID-19 and maybe climate change, we might have an equivalent of war in terms of how it's really disrupting people's livelihoods. Sophie was talking about supply chains also. So for us in the communities, one, we are dealing with people that already were really struggling, and that the COVID-19 crisis has really compounded that. Most of those people are dealing with the lack of liquidity, and most of them really run small businesses. And so when there is lockdown, especially for rural farmers who require the urban community to be able to buy their food, essentially you've already locked down their livelihood, and they have to find ways to survive. And so I think most of the time in times of crisis, even here in Kenya, people tend to want to hold on to the little they have. And so we are seeing a lot of people are trying to hold on to the small national currency they have. And having CICs there gives them sort of a way out. It shows them that here is something, a tool that's for all of us, that can be used in the community, whether you have the national currency or not. So there are some people in the community that maybe have kept some savings in national currency. What about the people that don't have that kind of saving? What do they do? How will they meet their needs? And how long can they wait for the government to come and give them to those needs? And so you give them this, and it's essentially about trust. And that's what I like about it being also on the blockchain, because blockchain is about trust. Community currencies work on the premise that the community trusts each other, and they are promising that as long as you're in this community, you don't have to go hungry. As long as you're here, you have something to offer. When Will was making the introduction, he talked about asset-based. All those communities have assets, and essentially you are saying just the lack of money should not reduce them to beggars. We are saying they have goods and services, they are wealthy the way they are. And so for COVID to be able to disrupt that and for us to have solutions, it's really good. And in terms of really encouraging livelihoods, and in terms of also for people to be able to save the little that they have and they can reinvest back into businesses. So when you're thinking of solutions like in terms of long-term food security, and you want to give these farmers inputs, where will they get money for the inputs? And if they are meeting their basic needs with the community inclusion currency and they're able to save, and they can go to towns now and buy input, such that when things get ready, the rural communities will be able to have an answer in terms of food security. I think that's what we are mostly noticing. I think I can give a chance to my fellow.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Will, do you want to add something from your perspective as well?
Oh, I think that was great.
Okay, thank you. Sophie, do you want to add a little bit your perspective and experience?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Dama. I mean, I would also add to that it's a great way of distributing credit and aid without necessarily having to move physical cash around, which is obviously really important. First of all, where distance and conflict is a challenge, which obviously is my experience, but also where there's a challenge of social distancing, or people are just isolating for various reasons. I mean, it's enabled us to keep savings groups going even when people can't physically meet, which obviously is a huge benefit. But I think the biggest benefit in these challenging times when you're looking at governments trying to disperse relief to small businesses and individuals, is traceability, and the fact that you can see where the money's going, and the money will be going to the right beneficiaries. And where you've got fragile countries with challenging supply chains and challenging value chains, I think that's a huge benefit, not just for governments, but also for international donors. So, if you look at the donations that have been made from the global north to Africa, the level of confidence that those donors can have that their money is actually going to the right people, I think is significant, and that's important if you're going to keep those donations flowing. We've already seen that the global remittance market has virtually collapsed because of the crisis, and that needs to be replaced, and some of that replacement is coming from international bodies who need these kind of confidence. Now, having said that, the infrastructure isn't far from mature and it's not in place yet, but if we can do that in small ways in the projects that we're running, then we can demonstrate that this is a very robust way of distributing not just funds but also investment and lending and everything else, internationally as well as locally. It's perhaps getting a bit beyond the COVID crisis, but I think it gives us an opportunity to demonstrate the power of what we've built.
Yeah, no, definitely. Anka, your perspective on how community currencies can help trade and community development during the crisis.
Sure. Thank you for that. And I absolutely agree with Sophie. I think especially in this time where we're looking at emergency aid and emergency stimulus looking to be dispersed, the ability to trace the funds and ensure there's no fraud, there's no ghost users, and that they reach their intended recipient, I think it's extremely important. But I think it adds the ability to potentially issue a sort of send stimulus using digital currency, brings an additional aspect that I think is really important, and that is, how do you make sure that in times of crisis where, as we've heard from the other panelists, the instinct is to save the funds as opposed to spending them, how do you ensure that potential stimulus funds are going back into the economy and actually targeted at making sure that the food supply is there, making sure that essential services are there, and the funds are going to help entrepreneurs and small businesses survive. And this is where one of the very interesting concepts in monetary policy, which is demurrage, which is basically the opposite of an interest rate, can be applied. And with smart contracts and programmable money, you can do that. Our team has been talking to governments of sort of small countries who are currently looking of issuing stimulus via digital currencies and having it built a demurrage fee in. So if people don't spend the money in the industries that the government, especially the small entrepreneurs that the government is looking to help through the crisis, then there is sort of a fee that's applied on their stimulus package. I think this is really a fantastic way, an example of how digital currencies can help communities, and it can help stabilize them through the crisis in a very targeted type of intervention way. And another one, and this goes back, I saw a question about sort of pilots that CLabs has been running. One pilot that we've recently concluded in Kenya, I think, is particularly relevant in this context, where we've been working with a big microwork provider to test the feasibility of having individuals doing microwork tasks from their phone and being paid in digital currency that they can spend in their community. Precisely right now, when people are in lockdown, they are unable probably to go about their regular and earning their regular livelihoods. The ability to perform a series of tasks online and be paid in a currency that's being recognized and accepted in your community, I think it's particularly important. Of course, you're not going to make a career out of it, but if you are in lockdown and you have your phone and an internet connection, you're able to at least make ends meet.
Thank you so much. And maybe one follow-up question to you, Anka, but also to everyone else, is basically because you talked a lot about liquidity, about basically moving cash without having to spend now. Do you see difference in how governments and public institutions are actually interacting with community currencies and seeing that as an opportunity these days, also linked to the crisis?
Absolutely. We've so obviously I have a bit of a bias coming from the World Bank and the world of multilaterals that I keep in touch with my former colleagues in the UN world. And there's been a lot of interest in how to increase community resilience and financial resilience in the face of crisis. We've had quite a few conversations, starting with the World Bank, with whom we're working on a trust fund traceability project right now, to even local governments, including in the US, who are interested in how can I look at community currencies, how can I help my community survive the crisis and be better, with a lot of the global supply chains taking a hit, how can I help my community be resilient in the face of crisis? A lot of them are thinking about community currencies, whether it comes in sort of targeted vouchers or actual currency. There's been a lot of interest in the past few months around that.
Yeah. So, Sophie, do you want to maybe add something as well?
Yeah, I mean, I would add that I've just in general over the last couple of years, I've noticed a definite trend in international financial institutions and central banks towards exploring not just digital versions of their own fiat currency, but also alternative currencies based on different types of asset sets. I mean, my personal thing, obviously, being a behavioral platform, is currencies based on social capital, but we're also seeing more currencies based on natural capital of various types, and that I think is learning from the not exactly failed but slightly clunky experiment of carbon trading, which has made an input, but is traditionally quite challenging to manage. But that combined now with the technology that we have has really opened up some interesting opportunities. And of course, last year, all the central banks were completely spooked by Libra. And that has really accelerated not just the research, because I mean, some of the central banks, like Bank of England's done some fantastic research, and the Bank for International Settlements as well. But actually moving from the desktop to actual practical implementations. And the crisis has obviously highlighted the opportunity that these types of currencies have. And what I'm seeing is that from a regulatory perspective, there is much more openness to alternative currencies, including community currencies, than there was previously. And I think that that's both a result of the crisis, but also a result of this gradual thawing that we've seen over the last couple of years, based partly on fear and partly on a growing acceptance that the world is changing. So I think it's really exciting. I mean, obviously the crisis is a terrible thing, but I think it really opens the door for truly distributed economy in a way that we have only been dreaming of. And Anka mentioned demurrage, and that's one of my favorite words, but I don't use it very much because it scares central banks. But it does really, it opens up doors for communities to build wealth in the community and to put that wealth back into the community instead of siphoning it out, which I think is the most exciting thing.
Thank you. Will, Dama, do you want to add anything on that topic as well?
I think for me, I'll just echo what they said, that with the crisis, it's really, I think, almost softening up government stance in terms of digital money systems, because like one instance, for instance, in Kenya, the government is really pushing people to do more of the mobile money rather than the paper money, because of course the fear of passing along the infection. But that also speaks to the likelihood that this will change a lot of things going forward. Because I think in terms of most governments were not really open, they didn't really seek to understand. But then the more things go, the more they are really researching into it. And I especially like the thing about demurrage, especially when it comes to giving money. And in terms of corruption also, governments really want to know if the crisis goes on for really long and they have to do a lot of mass support to people, they want to be sure that there's a lot of targeted funding and it's going where it's supposed to be. So I think it's going to be really good in terms of how it encourages government to lean towards digital currencies, and I'm hoping eventually towards digital tokens that are more community inclusion currencies.
Yeah, thank you. Will,
can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Just that, Red Cross is essentially a kind of a parastatal organization. There's kind of franchises in different states and countries, and so we've been working with them quite extensively in Kenya now. And we've gone up to 20-something thousand users at 500% growth since COVID started. And people are trading, around 4,000 to 8,000 people a day are trading about, on average, I think it's 500 I just sent a link there. So 400,000 Kenyan shillings on a day is about $4,000. And then we break it up into, food and water. And these are sort of pretty broad stroke categories if you look on this this link that I just sent. But anyways, yeah, there's huge uptake. People don't have a medium of exchange. The way we work with Red Cross is just going around, and as people are being trained about COVID, they're given 400 vouchers that they can go spend on soap, and they're encouraged to circulate those amongst each other, so they can buy water and food and kind of share what they have with each other. And so it's been pretty amazing. We always kind of thought of community currencies as sort of counter-cyclic to the national currency. And so when there's a crash or something, you kind of expect people to use them more. And so it's kind of, perhaps sort of textbook case in this situation right now.
Yeah. So there's a question from Margarita in the Q&A, which is actually getting quite close to a question that I was also wanting to ask you as a follow-up. And the question from Margarita is, how do you deal with communities with very limited access to technology, internet, and electricity? Thinking of rural communities. So I think that is very close to the work that most of you are doing day by day. Maybe you can go a little bit into how technologies like blockchain can be useful in this kind of context, but what are also maybe the risks around that when you deal with limited access to technology, internet, and electricity. I don't know who wants to go first on that question.
I can start on that.
Yeah.
So we opted a long time ago to not go the web route and Androids, just because it didn't make sense for who we were working with. So we hooked up everything to button feature phones using what's called USSD, which is similar to SMS. It's kind of a layer where you can actually get little menus like hit 1 to send, hit 2 to check your balance, hit 3 to look at the directory. So there's a little directory where you can see who's selling what. You can say what you're trying to sell. So there's a little kind of marketplace there. And it works on these little tiny phones that barely even have buttons on them usually. And quite often we get groups of women where one woman has a phone, one of these little tiny phones, and everyone else has a SIM card, because they're often given out free, the SIM cards. And that's everyone's account, is essentially their SIM card. So they swap the SIM card into that phone and do their transactions and swap it back out. And so I can't imagine that those feature phones are going to go away for the next 5 years at least. So I think I would love us to have, you know, some of the stuff that Sophie's working on in terms of having web apps that these groups can use as well. But I think the USSD system, I mean, basically we just have a server sitting there waiting at the telecom for transactions to come in. People have a little pin on their phone, and then we push those transactions to the blockchain.
Okay. Sophie, maybe you want to go next on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're obviously facing the same problem, possibly slightly more extreme. So we've gone down the route of a web app, as Will said, and Anka also referred to this because it's something that's very lightweight. And we're also working with an operating system called KaiOS, which basically turns button phones into, or browser-enabled button phones into sort of mini Androids. And they're actually rolling out in Niger starting this year. And the price point is similar to that of a standard button phone. So it's a very appropriate one for our use case, because in our rollout, we're in many cases rolling out phones at the same time, because it's the first time these women have used a phone. And what I've found from my personal experience is that women who haven't used a phone at all before are more comfortable with the button phone than they are with the touch screen. I see, especially in older women, that they're often quite apprehensive about using the touch screen. They don't want to touch it. They don't want to use it. And the other thing about Niger, like much of Central Africa and West Africa as well, is that the environment is very harsh for Androids. So they're not very tolerant of heat. They don't like sand. And of course, if you need to charge a phone every day, then living off grid like 83% of people in Niger, then it's not really an option. So the button phones are definitely, they're there to stay, as Will says. One of the other issues that we've had to address is the very low rate of literacy in Niger. Only 1% of women finish school in the country. And in rural areas, hardly anyone. So we've also had to do a lot of user work to work with, even on the web-enabled interface. It sort of looks like a button phone-driven menu, so that it's easier to remember and navigate for people who have very low literacy. And then the other thing we've done is that we have a single device per group. And then the other members interact with that device rather than everyone having their own device. But again, we can configure it for different types of communities. And I also mentioned the offline mode we've developed, which we have not yet deployed. And it's a bit more of a challenging deploy because it requires a bit of hardware. We put a Raspberry Pi in the village, and that stacks up all the transactions on a blockchain node emulator, which can then connect through one of the devices as soon as connectivity is achieved. Now, clearly that brings in all sorts of risks, particularly if devices get damaged or destroyed. So that's not our preferred option, but we can also deploy to places which literally have no connectivity at all.
Thank you very much. Anka, do you want to add something on that as well?
Sure. I think that our focus is just slightly different. We are not yet present in sort of very disconnected rural communities, and I think that will continue to be the case for a couple of years. Our approach has been more on making sure that the DApp, that first, the platform is extremely light in terms of both memory and electricity. There's been several user research trips that we've had from refugee camps in Tanzania to sort of rural areas in Liberia and Sierra Leone to work with communities and test and make sure that the app, the way it looks, works well in very low resource environments. That said, our perspective has always been that we want to work with partners and build an ecosystem where people can have access to, granted low, sort of low cost, but still Android phones. For example, we work with sort of a, sorry, give me 1 second to understand what's going on in terms of noise. Somebody started drilling in my walls right now. Stopped. Never mind. Excellent timing. And so, for example, one of our alliance partners, what they do is they provide internet access. So they're just hotspots that come with your own solar panels, and we're working with them to enable the mobile agents that we work with to have them available. We also work with a provider that allows people to buy Android phones and then start providing providing micro work through the device in order to pay for it. So we have an approach where, yes, we realize that smartphones are not in everybody's hands, but how do we find the right partners to enable people to have access to both smartphones and the opportunities that these offer? And I think this is a lot of the rationale and the vision behind the Alliance for Prosperity that CLabs is part of.
Thank you so much. I just saw one question as a follow-up to, I think, what you've been talking about, Sophie, from Marco. What is the OS Mini Android you mentioned? Maybe you can quickly go into that real quick, Sophie.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I was just coming off mute. Yeah, so what I was talking about was KaiOS. It's spelled KAIOS for operating system, obviously. And what it is it's an operating system for browser-enabled feature phones that only need charging once a week. So you've got everything from your sort of button phone all the way through to something that looks like a BlackBerry. And it basically enables them to run Android-style apps. They have quite a large range of apps already enabled for it, but you're still navigating with your D-pad button. So it's a sort of hybrid operating system between an Android and a button phone. They've got about 135 million units shipped. They're very big in India, and they're just going into Africa at the moment in quite a big way, which is why we're partnering with them. And they're due to roll out to, I think it's 17 million units by the end of next year. And one of the reasons that we like them is because they're rolling out in Niger, which is not a country that's a great focus of many telcos. And their customer group, their customer focus is very similar to ours in that they're targeting primarily women in rural areas who have never used technology before.
Thank you. So it's a really interesting system.
They're actually the second.
Yep.
So I just say they're actually the second biggest operating system in India after Android. So they're quite big.
Yeah. So Marco, I hope that answered your question. Yeah, he says thanks. That's great. Dama, do you want to add something on the role of blockchain and in communities and rural communities, and whether that is helpful, or what are also the risks? Anything you would like to add on the question?
I think my colleagues have answered most of it.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, then I will go into one last question that I would like to ask all of you before diving into the questions that are currently building up in the Q&A, is basically that we are always looking at these topics from the perspective of bringing aid to rural communities, especially in times of crisis. But I would like to raise this question a little bit the other way around. What can we actually learn from these communities during times like COVID-19? Is there anything that we could take away from what is already in place in those communities, and also from the experience that you have gathered over the last years? Maybe starting with you, Dama.
I think for me, I've noticed one is what we'd call their resiliency. And I think when you talk about community inclusion currency or community currencies, it speaks to that because it's essentially a really bottom-up solution. It's telling them that all the assets or most of the things they need are within their community, and how can they really rally themselves towards that. And I think Will can attest it to most of these communities. Even before we introduced the community currencies, they had their own copy mechanisms, and most of them were geared towards social aspects of it. So you'd find that women would form saving groups, what we'd call merry-go-rounds, and they would find ways to pull resources and support each other. And it's always been there. And so the thing I think for us, when we go into that community, instead of, we should find ways to fortify what's already existing in the communities. And one of them is those saving groups. And also, I think we shouldn't think so much about the economic aspects, because economics tend to change. Yes, one time you have paper money, next people are moving towards digital. People are thinking blockchain right now, people are thinking about tokens. But what is always transcending all this is the social aspect of it. So it's really important to look at the socioeconomic aspect, and in terms of the solidarity economy that's already existing in the communities, because it's always there. And so it's even now for COVID, it's really amazing. If you look around the world, people are really looking for ways to rally towards that. So when you think about Red Cross and going to this community like Will talked about, and for them to be able to meet their basic needs with the community currency, for them to be able to pull those resources and invest them into things that they value, it's, I think, really empowering, rather than us telling them we should invest in this or that. So for them to be able to do that, I think is quite magical. I think that's what I've learned.
Totally agree. I mean, So I mean, the thing that I think the business communities in the global north have lost sight of is helping each other and pooling common assets towards a common good. And like Dama, I mean, I see this everywhere in Africa, is that the groups of women get together and they support each other, and they are the community. I mean, in Niger, they're each looking after between 5 and 15 people. So of course, when there is, an excess of capital of any kind, that gets invested in the community, whether it's education, health, or irrigation, planting trees, whatever. And that is what I think micro businesses in the global north have lost. And what I would love to see is bringing that model back to the global north. I mean, before we went into Niger, we had a product in Denmark. We're working with micro businesses, and they didn't exactly regard each other as competitors, but they didn't collaborate very well, even though they've got all these sort of guilds and things. So I think bringing some of the learnings from these communities where social capital is so important and helps communities is something that we can all learn in the global north. We can certainly learn from Africa in particular.
One thing that I would add is that I think we are already applying concepts that we find in these communities without realizing where they come from. I think we talk about crowdfunding and tokenized assets and peer-to-peer learning as if the fintech community in San Francisco invented it, when actually these are concepts that have existed in community for thousands of years. The concept of having two families come together and together buy 3 cows that can't divide equally. That's the definition of crowdfunding and tokenized assets, people coming together without actually putting those names on it. Peer-to-peer lending in communities has been around for thousands of years. And I think this is realizing that a lot of the concepts that we think of having, coming out of Silicon Valley actually come of communities that have been doing this for ages. I think it's important. I think it's also important to remember that the greatest innovation usually comes where most frictions are. The same way M-Pesa was never sort of a corporate innovation, but it came out of a need to transfer value. I don't, in addition to what Caroline and Sophie have said, I'm actually, excited to be sort of 6 months from now and see what other innovations and practices come out of these communities, because I think they are going to be the ones sort of deciding what the great next innovations are we're going to be talking about in 5 years will be.
Yes, really interesting perspectives. Will, did you want to add anything to that?
Sure. Maybe just to think about, like, one thing that's also really ancient is the concept of collateral, right? And we get into this whole thing of like, yay, we all trust each other. Let's create let's create currency because we all trust each other. And, like, you can imagine if everyone trusts each other well enough to like stop their car on the freeway and hug each other, like there's still going to be some guy driving a Corvette down the road. And it's quite a dangerous concept. And I think like the community currency concept of the last 30 years, I mean, I got into this about 20 years ago, and it was always, very much about, just go out and, you as a community can create a currency, and okay, great. But what's the commitment behind it? What kind of guarantees are there behind it, right? Is it just some guy in his garage, like making little pieces of paper? Right? Like, or is it just some guy who invented the next Bitcoin and is going to convince someone to buy a pizza with it? Right? So like it's the whole, to me, part of the blockchain invention. What's so cool about it in this case is that you have the opportunity to see, is there actually something behind this token, right? So if Dama creates a Dama coin tomorrow, you could actually go on the blockchain, and if there was a contract behind that, you could see, is there some kind of reserve? Is it convertible to any other kind of currency? And so that's what really got us into blockchain, was the ability to put contracts behind these currencies that actually show what's behind them, with a market value. And so what we're using right now is a collateral pool. So you create your community currency and you actually put up some collateral behind it, and that collateral gives it convertibility to fiat, but also to other community currencies around it. And it produces sort of a backer of last resort and a market around that, without any, need for market makers. Exactly. It's all autonomous. And so that's been a really nice thing. And I think, like the beauty of this stage we're at right now, if we're talking about creating currencies, and I don't know, a lot of these projects, we're talking about either using, national currencies or stable coins only. You're not really talking about creating currencies or giving the people the ability to create currencies. We're just talking about moving around fiat, basically mixed into other stable coins. But if we're really talking about creating new credit systems, new currencies out there, right? Well, is there some basis for which they can all have value against each other? And so the concept of reserve currency versus credit, I think, is a really important concept that we sort of wrap our heads around. And projects like Libra or Bitcoin, they're quite often after this realm of reserve currency. And in our case in Kenya, we use the reserve currency, like the national currency, or US dollar or DAI is perfectly fine for where we are right now. We just need credit systems so people can all eat. But they need an ability to trust those credit systems, right? So we can use those reserve currencies, right? We can use those stable currencies as reserves or collateral that enable all these communities to establish the value of their credit between each other, right? So they can create, a trade deficit mapped onto their exchange price in this way. And I think it's a really, really important concept. And I think, we sort of lose the whole ability to create tokens now is so easy that we can all just make currencies all the time, but we haven't really thought about, okay, how do they connect together? What kind of basic protocols do we use? Is there any collateral behind them? How should they be regulated? How much collateral should be behind them? I think those are the kinds of questions that I think will bring community currency into mainstream, because technically we can regulate it with a permissionless smart contract 1,000x more regulated than Wells Fargo is, right? Because you actually can know at any second what's actually behind it, and you can ensure that the issuer is not going to issue more credit than the contract allows. If it's a permissionless contract and no one can mess with it, then there you go. Like there's your new decentralized banking industry and credit industry, and it can be done by women holding a feature phone in the middle of a desert. So I think that's, to me, the super, super exciting thing we are right now, is just saying, hey, here are a whole bunch of open source tech that almost anyone can use. Yeah, programmers are way too expensive, but really all the tools are out there, right? We're just waiting for an organization to come around and say, hey, everybody, we've built this public utility for everyone to use. Let's all use it. And it's not going to be a centralized thing where we force you to use our reserve currency, where you're not forced to use our blockchain, right? None of that sort of extractive nonsense. That we can actually do this stuff because the technology is all out there, and we're just kind of waiting for some group to say, oh, gosh, I can't make money off of that. How are we going to allow this to happen until we can make enough money off of it? And that, I feel like that's sort of the situation right now. It's just kind of a waiting game. Say, okay, we're all trying to build this kind of basic technology, but everyone's really trying to make a buck off it at the same time. And so it's like, well, I don't know. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. All right, I'm done.
Okay, thank you very much, Will. So I will go into the questions from our audience now, and I think we have two questions that are very close to each other, actually, about how about getting a digital currency working. So the first question is from Daud. He's asking, is it first community building, then realizing the real needs, and then issuing a currency that incentivizes the wished and worked out outcome? It would be awesome if you could share your experience in setting it up as your best practice approach and lessons learned. And Jan is asking, how do you get a digital currency working? How do you start? How do you get people involved doing this currency? So maybe you can give some perspectives on how to best start that. I don't know who wants to answer first. Go ahead and speak now.
I'm happy to start. I think from our perspective, and one that we've taken from the very beginning has been, what are the issues that you're trying to solve for? Because people always have a variety of currencies they could be using, and I mean just fiat currencies, not necessarily digital. The question is, what is useful for them? What solves a particular need? What we found quite frequently in our research is people prefer to spend in the local currency, but prefer hard currencies to save, which makes a lot of sense because it insulates them from inflation. And so, again, people tend to deal with more than one currency at the same time, whether they see it as such or not. Vouchers that they receive can also be construed as a form of currency. And so for us, it has always been a question of, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? What is the friction that the community is facing, and what are you solving for? That's how the currency gets built, with characteristics that help address that question. Because when it solves a problem, people will want to use it. And then it's a matter of what the community currency does. Is it aimed at encouraging people to spend inside the community? Then what are the most frequent, what are the marketplaces that people will be interested in spending this on? Education, but then ultimately is empowering the community to take it and run with it because it solves a problem. If it doesn't, it's not going to work. And the first step in building trust is, one, education, and then ability to see cash out. If people don't trust that whatever community currency is worth something, either in exchange against fiat or other currencies, or they're able to exchange it for goods and services, then there's no way they're going to touch it again.
Does anyone want to add something to
that? Yeah, I'd agree. I think so. Yeah, I mean, there's no point in building technology unless people need it, whatever it is, and there's no point in providing goods and services unless people need them. So it has to start with the user's need. But I would also add that I think a community currency, I mean, as we've alluded to in several of the questions, is a particularly useful instrument for informal financial groups who have existed since the dawn of time, because it mirrors what they're already doing. It's just more efficient. So where you can add an obvious benefit to something that is recognizable and is understood and trusted as a concept, that makes it really easy to introduce, and well, nothing's easy, but relatively easy to introduce, and easy for customers to use, and easy for customers to recognize the benefits. So yeah, I mean, there has to be a need, but I would say in most cases there also has to be an existing precedent where you're replacing something, not just nothing, because replacing nothing, generally, if you want to replace nothing, the nothing is there because nobody needs it, or the nothing is there because the concept is just too complicated. So I would say you're replacing something, but you're making it better.
Any further additions from you, Dama or Will?
For me, in terms of, I'm saying there are a lot of questions about trust. When you go to a community, the best way to gain trust is also whom do you approach first to be able to start this. And also to echo what my colleagues have said, there is that need in the community. Like for us, these communities were going into debt, and they weren't going into huge debt like most people that are living well are. They're going into debt just to be able to buy water that's like 2 cents. And they would circulate that 20 cents, and they would go to the next neighbor and say, just give me 20 shillings so that I can buy water. And they can't, so they're perpetually in debt because they just can't get that extra 20 shilling. And so essentially, it's IOUs that are circulating the community. So even when we started, it almost like debt circulating because people don't have money. And it's not even big money for big things. It's just for basic things like just to be able to buy flour, to buy water, to get a right to take my produce to the market. And so that's the need that was there. And so essentially, so how do you go to the community? You have to get people that the community trusts, that they know they have their best interest at heart. You look at maybe religious leaders, you look at community gatekeepers, that people know that if this person talks to something, especially they vouch for it. And also because they know the problem that's there, you should be able to say something that resonates with them. Because if you go, when you're doing this big aid, you don't ask the really small questions like, are you eating 3 square meals a day? No, we don't go to ask that. When I was working in the communities, we wanted to set up a water tank. That's all I wanted to do because in my head, it was about them getting water. But I never asked even a single day to the woman that kept attending the meetings every day, or all the other women, if they had eaten 3 times that day, or if their child, when they walk back home, they're getting a meal, maybe 20 kilometers from school. I never asked that. So it's basically about those small things that we as people that are coming to the community that we can't answer. And essentially it's them answering to that need. And like you're saying, I think Sophie said, we are essentially a mirror to something that was already there. So they cope by either going into debt, or they cope by going into saving groups whereby they get small loans so that they spend and then go get another loan to pay back that other loan. For, I think William can even attest to it, we have saving groups that would go to this saving group, get loans so that they pay to the other saving group and go around. And it was really amazing to see that within 6 months of them having this tool in the community currency, they were able to save money enough such that they were able to pay most of the debts in the saving groups. And it was really empowering for them. And in terms of them, when you go next and you say, okay, we've gotten funding, want to do a water tank, they're like, we don't think we need a water tank again, because they're already meeting some of their needs. So they're empowered enough to know that maybe we need something better. Why not reach out to someone else so that we get piped water instead? And in terms of the blockchain, when they have those transactions and we're able to show there were some months, almost 3 months, and we'll be able to show these people were spending so much of the community currency on water. And it spoke to the idea that they didn't have water in their community. And for them to be able to access that data and go to the local leader who wanted to be elected, and like, you see, we've been spending so much money on water, and because they're accessing the information on the blockchain, if you want us to elect you, why not put for us piped water? That's what we are talking about. And that's how you build trust. You show them ways that they can be able to meet their needs without you essentially feeling that need, but essentially showing them that they have the power to gradually meet the needs that they have.
Daud and Jan, I hope this answered your questions. Otherwise, please let us know in the chat if you have any more questions. So next two questions are actually going in the direction of Zelo. So you, Anka, what are the main differences between Zelo and Libra? And I think you already touched upon this one. Can you talk about some of the pilots that Zelo has done?
Sure. So I think, Celo and Libra have similar goals, which is tackling financial inclusion. And I think it's going to take definitely more than 2 projects. It's probably going to take 100 different projects looking at different angles to work on this. So I think it's actually great for the environment and the space that Libra has joined the conversation. In terms of differentiators, we are decentralized, so Celo is a decentralized blockchain. Collateral is transparent on chain. There's real-time monitoring, and so that aspect of censorship resistance is something that Zelo has. Celo does not select its own validators, while Libra does, and so has the freedom to freeze transactions if they see fit. The Celo blockchain has, I think, around 79 validators right now from around the world. And so fully decentralized. Our reserve is based on crypto assets. It is algorithmic and decentralized in the sense there is an algorithm that keeps the peg of the stable coins. Unlike the Libra one, which is fiat based. Also, in terms of how KYC is being performed, because Zelo has the phone number based light identity layer, which in most emerging markets there is the need for the law asks for mandatory SIM registration. By default, if you're using the wallet or different applications on Zelo, there is a first level of KYC that is extremely similar to that of mobile money, and it caters to people that don't actually have 2-3 types of IDs, so that they're in order to perform KYC. Let me think. There's a number of others. We are proof of stake blockchain, so people are able to vote in governance. Introduction of new stable coins on the platform can only be done through a governance decision. There's no corporate control over network. And because, if I remember well, Libra is also EVM compatible. So actually, you know what? I'm gonna stop there. I've been asked this question in a little while, so maybe I'm not up to date with all of the technical differences. Pilots, yes. So the team has done. I think we've now reached around a dozen pilots in 10 countries, ranging from the Philippines to both East and West Africa and Latin America. The pilots have focused on different use cases that I've mentioned, from the earn use case with people being able to perform micro work on their phones and being paid with digital currency, to give use cases. We're working with Mercy Corps on a pilot. Lending, Grameen Foundation is a member of the Alliance, and they're working with us, and we've been engaged in how can you lend and what are the advantages of utilizing digital currencies for lending. We've had a couple of pilots focused on payments and remittances, both in Latin America and in Asia. And I think in the interest of time, on our Medium page, as well as on our website, celo.org, you can go, and we've made the details and sort of learnings and the logistical information of how the pilots have been run available there, with user interviews and learnings from most of our pilots. And so those of you who are interested, please look on our website or our Medium page. And if you still have questions, please feel free to follow up with me as well. I just don't want to take all of the time that we still have left.
Yeah, thank you. So I think the last audience question that I would like to answer, to ask all of you today, is a really interesting one, I think, from Arne. Hi, Arne, by the way. Is how do you balance the transparency and auditability of a public blockchain with the individual interest of privacy and of transactions? Whoever would want to answer that first.
I can try. So in terms of privacy, in terms of what's on the blockchain for us is just transaction data and a wallet address. Any other information like names, phone numbers, even what you sell, that's being encrypted and stored completely off the blockchain. What we would like to be able to do is move all of that storage onto like IPFS or Swarm, and make sure the user is in full control of it themselves. For now, we warehouse that ourselves. Together with Red Cross, just for security reasons. But otherwise, yeah, what's public is only transaction data with wallet addresses. So by the time you figure out who those wallet addresses are, you're probably having a transaction with them face to face anyways. So you probably know who they are anyway. So that side of it we haven't been so worried about, but definitely we don't want vulnerable people's private information just being shared without consent.
Yeah, same for us. We're actually fully GDPR compliant as well, even though we're running out in Africa, because we understand the importance of people's personal data. And we also want people to be able to hold on to their personal data and monetize what they can if they want to in the future. And like Will, we only publish transactions to the blockchain. Those transactions can include non-financial transactions, but they're still just transactions with the wallet address and the transaction. I think Anka talked about abstracting phone numbers as well. That's something else that we do, although not all of our customers have phones, so we use different identities.
I think similarly, a public blockchain only will publish transaction amounts or and the wallet addresses. There are conversations in the space of applying additional layers of privacy where you would be able to, under certain guidelines, and that will depend on regulation going forward, on maybe being able to shield either the transaction amount or the wallet address. The beautiful thing with mapping phone numbers to public addresses is that you can't reverse engineer for them. So you can't go from the public address and figure out what the phone number is. And so similarly, all the data that is available is numbers and wallets. You don't have personal identifiers of any sort that C-Labs works on. I would imagine that as we work with partners, we're interested in building different types of applications from saving circles, which is one case, to others. A lot of that data privacy will have to be, the data will have to be stored either off-chain, and in terms of privacy, they will have to comply with the local regulations existing in that jurisdiction.
Yep. Thank you so much. So we are at the end of our session, and I would just like to maybe for closing have a really short one sentence answer from every one of you around what would be your hope and vision for a more sustainable future for our financial markets and for our life after the crisis. Who would want to start with that? I know it's a hard one, but
Yeah,
I think in terms of
I'm happy to start. I mean, oh, sorry, Anka, go ahead.
Sophie.
Okay, thank you. No, I was just going to say before I rudely interrupted Anka, what I want to see is the acceleration as a move towards the truly distributed economy, because I think that is fundamental to empowering communities and redressing economic imbalance, especially for the most disempowered communities and especially for women globally.
I fully agree. I was going to say like extremely similar, Sophie, which is I'm hoping that we see a lot more customized financial services to the local communities developed by the communities themselves, because they know best what they need. And I think the gender focus is also just fundamental. And with each crisis, we see more and more the gender financial inclusion gap isn't particularly getting better.
I think for me, I'm hoping that as we go forward, we'll always look for ways not to leave anyone behind. And that even as we try, sometimes the solutions are complex, but I hope that we'll find a way to make them simple enough so that they don't disillusion people. And yet they should be efficient enough so that everyone can be able to meet their basic needs. So yes, let's not leave anyone behind as we think of these solutions.
For me,
yes, I can hear you.
yeah, you can hear me. I think we just have to hope that these types of ideas and technology like get out there, and it seems like that kind of stuff is kind of unstoppable right now. Like the idea that currencies should only be created by nation states, and that sort of ethos could be at an end. With all sorts of things going on right now, including like China going to maybe a digital currency, things like Libra, and like there's been a lot of challenges to the status quo on who gets to create a currency, which is really exciting. And it's definitely not the end of the story. They're trying to outlaw stable coins now and things like that. There's all kinds of stuff going on around the regulatory getting their hands on and saying, wait, if this looks viable, then we have to either, like own it or stop it somehow, for us to make money off of it. And so there's that chance that we have right now in terms of Corona, in terms of crisis, to really say, hey, actually, we don't need you all that much. We have technology. We can actually do better regulations than Goldman Sachs does. That's for sure. Right? Like there's a lot of chance that we have right now to just say, hey, technology's here. The systems aren't as complicated as we make them out to be. But just to create really good technology, really good public infrastructure. And I don't think, we're just not even thinking about public infrastructure very much these days. Especially where I am, where Dama and I are both just a little bit north of Mombasa. And, expecting government to develop infrastructure or developing anyone to develop infrastructure is kind of like a joke. I mean, finally, after living here for 10 years, they started building this road that would connect these two cities together. And it's just, like there's so little thought into public infrastructure at all. And currency itself is like the most important, or one of the most important public infrastructures we have. And it's been sold just like an insane person to packs of wolves, right? Like literally our entire financial system is run out of for-profit, right? Like I don't, we might get into social entrepreneurship and like there's beautiful, capitalist motifs and things like that. But probably one of the systems that you would want to at least be as little extractive as possible would be the monetary system, because it is in a way sort of designed for extraction completely right now. And so I think that's the big opportunity right now, is to say, wow, can we do better than what's been done in the past? And I think the answer is just totally yes. And we have so much technology out there. I mean, literally, there are dozens of organizations right now developing the same technology right now. Like if you look at the number of blockchain startups that are just helping people make tokens, right? And make tokens with X, there's always, like a rubber ducky or, something there, a Bitcoin or something. Everyone's just trying to get you to use their tokens, where everyone can create tokens. That's very exciting in a sense. But at the same time, it's like, okay, wait, why maybe wasn't this a good idea a few hundred years ago either? Like what are the rules we would want? Daughter jumping on the bed. But anyway, so that's my hope right now, is that we kind of tap into the potential we have right now. And, before this entire industry is locked down, try to create look, BitTorrent has been around for like 20 years almost right now. And the reason it's not shut down is because it really is decentralized, right? It really is censor proof. And so if we can create systems where people can create censor proof currencies, amazing, really amazing. And that's actually possible. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much for your inspiring words, all of you, on how to. I think that's a very good end for this session. I could go on and talk to you for hours, because I think your work is so interesting and so important and so meaningful. But we have to unfortunately end it here. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time being here today and discussing with us. Big thank you from me, and I hope also from our audience. I hope the session has been useful for you as well. Thank you for being here, and thank you for sticking around. And so the last things I'm going to say is, please also join our next session tomorrow, where we're going to be talking with Karim Shabrak of CoinSense, Markus Ewald of the Digi project, and Sandra Uwantegehart of Oxfam and the Unplugged Cash project. So there is a bit more of insights for you to share today. And if you would like to go and meet the Positive Blockchain community, there is in the chat, there is a pinned message with a Zoom link, where you could actually see the discussion, continue a bit of discussion, and get to meet some of the people from Positive Blockchain. So join us tomorrow at 9. Join us in the Zoom if you like. And a very, very big thank you to all the speakers today. Thanks for taking time and having this discussion. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.